The air over Earth was thick with smoke and the stench of burning cities. Aiden Wells stood at the window of the war room, gazing out at the shattered skyline. The alien invaders had already decimated 3 major cities, and the world was teetering on the brink of collapse. Across the globe, governments were in disarray, and military command centers had fallen one by one. Earth's last defense now rested on the shoulders of a few remaining generals and warlords, each trying desperately to rally what little was left of humanity's forces. But none were as desperate or as capable as Aiden. His hands gripped the metal windowsill as a deep sigh escaped his lips. The weight of the world seemed heavier than ever. He was Earth's most celebrated hero, known for countless victories against the most brutal of enemies. Yet now, with humanity's very existence hanging in the balance, Aiden felt a cold fear gnawing at his gut. Could he still be the hero they needed? His mind wandered back to the losses of the past, the soldiers he'd failed to protect, the countless battles that had turned into futile bloodbaths. Was he still capable of leading them to victory, or was he just another man doomed to fail? "You're needed, Captain," a voice broke through his thoughts. It was General Vasquez, the leader of the Earth Defense Coalition, and the last person Aiden wanted to face. The general was a blunt, no-nonsense leader, someone who had once stood beside Aiden in the darkest days of war. Now, Vasquez was the embodiment of Earth's remaining military might, but she wasn't here to offer comfort. "General," Aiden muttered, turning toward her, his voice thick with exhaustion. "What's the situation?" Vasquez's eyes were grim. "The aliens have unleashed their new weapon, a city-destroying projectile that can obliterate an entire population in seconds. We're scrambling to adapt, but it's not enough." She paused, her gaze locking with Aiden's. "We need you to lead the final assault. We need you to rally the troops and take the fight directly to them." Aiden's heart skipped a beat. He had spent years running covert missions, fighting on the front lines, but the thought of facing an enemy with such power, it made his blood run cold. Yet, deep down, he knew there was no one else. The weight of leadership had always been his, even when he wanted to walk away. But it wasn't the weight that scared him. It was the fear of watching everything crumble once more. Aiden clenched his fists. "Tell me we have a plan." "We do," Vasquez replied, stepping closer. "A coalition of forces from the remnants of the world's armies have assembled a strike force. If we can infiltrate their command ship, we might be able to disable their weapon before it's launched again. But we'll have to get close, closer than any of us ever thought possible." Aiden's mind raced. This was it, their last chance. He couldn't afford to hesitate. The silence in the room was heavy, the pressure mounting with every second. He glanced at the blueprints on the wall, showing the alien mothership hovering just outside Earth's atmosphere. "Then we'll do it," Aiden said, his voice steady but his heart pounding in his chest. "We fight. We strike before they strike again." Vasquez nodded. "I knew you'd say that." As they left the war room, Aiden felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. But as he stepped outside, he saw the faces of the men and women who would fight beside him. Young and old, broken and hopeful. They were all looking to him for guidance. He didn't have the luxury of self-doubt anymore. He had to be the hero they needed. The countdown to Earth's last stand had begun, and Aiden Wells was determined to face it head-on. The strike force was assembled, a ragtag group of soldiers, engineers, and mercenaries, each with their own scars from the ongoing war. Aiden stood at the helm of the command ship, his hands resting lightly on the controls as he surveyed the faces of his team. His heart thudded in his chest, but he held it together, locking eyes with each member of the crew. They needed him to be strong, to believe in them and in their mission. "We're moving into position." Vasquez's voice came through the comms, pulling Aiden out of his thoughts. "You've got one shot at this, Captain. One shot." He had always known that every operation, every battle, came down to that. One chance, one moment where everything could be lost or won. The cold weight of responsibility hung on his shoulders like an anchor, but Aiden wasn't the man he used to be. The doubts, the fears, they didn't matter now. What mattered was the mission. Understood, Aiden said, taking a deep breath. Initiate Phase 1. The ship jolted as the engines powered up, sending them hurtling toward the alien mothership. Outside the viewport, the massive craft loomed, its sleek, terrifying form casting an eerie shadow across the stars. It was unlike anything humanity had ever built, twice the size of any warship in Earth's fleet, armed with enough firepower to decimate entire continents. But Aiden wasn't afraid of its size or its weaponry. He was afraid of what it represented, the overwhelming power of a force that didn't care about the lives it destroyed. "We've been detected," shouted Lieutenant Rivera from the tactical station, her fingers flying over the controls. "They've launched drones. We're being surrounded." The room went quiet. The air was thick with the realization that they had just been exposed. The drones were faster, more agile, and deadly. Humanity's forces would be shredded in seconds. "Get us closer," Aiden barked, his voice sharp and commanding. "We can't let them keep us at range." Rivera's eyes widened. "You're crazy. If we get too close." "Do it," Aiden interrupted, his gaze fixed on the mothership's massive form. "We have no other choice." With a quick glance toward Vasquez, Aiden felt a surge of determination. He'd led squads into battles where the odds were stacked against them. But this was a new kind of fight. The alien forces weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting to erase humanity from existence. They didn't want to negotiate, to coexist. They wanted to dominate. And Aiden had seen enough. He had lived enough loss. He wasn't going to let it happen. The ship lurched forward again as Rivera pushed the engines to their limits. The drones swarmed, darting in from all directions, but Aiden's crew fought back with a tenacity that surprised even him. The ship's weapons fired with deadly precision, blasting the enemy drones out of the sky one by one. But as they approached the mothership, the alien forces adapted. Their tactics shifted. New ships arrived, larger, more deadly. And suddenly, Aiden realized they were not merely engaging in a battle. They were being drawn into a trap. A massive enemy warship, nearly the size of the mothership itself, emerged from the shadows, its weapons trained on them. "Captain, we're not going to make it," Rivera said, her voice trembling with fear. "They've outflanked us." Aiden's mind raced. The trap had been set perfectly. If they didn't act now, it would be over. He glanced toward Vasquez, who was already preparing for the worst. "Hold steady," Aiden commanded. His voice was a calm force that cut through the tension. "We're not retreating. We're pushing forward, and we're taking them down." In that moment, the weight of his position as humanity's champion felt heavier than ever before, but Aiden was ready. He wasn't the man haunted by his past anymore. He was the one they needed, the one who would give everything for them to live. As the warship descended into the heart of the alien fleet, Aiden prepared to fight, knowing that in this moment, everything depended on his actions. The battle raged outside, and within the command ship, the atmosphere was one of cold determination. Aiden Wells gripped the edge of his console, the tension in his muscles matching the tautness of the crew around him. The ship shook violently as alien fire erupted all around them, tearing through the hull. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burnt circuitry and the low hum of failing systems. They had pushed through the first wave of enemies, but the cost was higher than expected. "Multiple breaches in the hull, Captain," Rivera called out, her fingers a blur across the controls. "We're losing power in the main engines. Shut down non-essential systems." Aiden barked, his voice steely with authority. "We keep moving forward, no matter what." As if on cue, a new wave of enemy ships appeared, their cloaking technology making them nearly invisible. The odds had shifted from bad to worse. The alien forces were relentless, adapting to every move they made. Yet, despite the increasing odds, Aiden's resolve remained unshaken. They couldn't afford to back down now. They had one shot at stopping the aliens' new weapon. "Get us to the launch bay now," Aiden ordered, looking toward Vasquez, who stood by his side. Her face was a mask of stoic determination, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "This isn't sustainable, Aiden," Vasquez warned, glancing at the damage reports flashing on her console. "We're going to lose more than just our ship. We'll lose the crew." "I know the cost," Aiden replied, his jaw clenched tight. "But I'm not letting humanity fall without a fight." The ship lurched again as enemy fire struck it directly, throwing Aiden against the console. He gritted his teeth, pushing himself back up. His vision swam for a moment, but he forced his mind back into focus. The stakes were beyond personal now. They were about the survival of the human race. "Captain." Rivera's voice was frantic as she turned to him. "We've got a breach in the main bridge. The airlock's gone. Lieutenant Ferris, he's down." Aiden froze. Ferris was one of the few remaining members of his squad from the earlier campaigns. The loss hit him harder than it should have. It wasn't just a soldier lost, it was a friend. Someone who had shared the same hellish experiences, who had fought beside him in the trenches. His death was a grim reminder of the toll this war had taken. "We need to keep pushing," Aiden said, his voice quieter now, but still resolute. "We move forward for Ferris, for everyone we've lost." Vasquez nodded, the grief in her eyes burning just as brightly as his. She, too, had known what it meant to lose those closest to her. "You're right," she said softly. "But we're not just fighting the aliens anymore, are we?" "No," Aiden muttered. "We're fighting the cost of all this, and I'm not sure how much longer we can keep paying." As they moved to the launch bay, the weight of their reality settled over him like a suffocating blanket. The team was down to a handful of fighters, each carrying a heavy burden of their own loss. And the knowledge that they were walking into the heart of the enemy's most advanced weapon only made the pressure mount. The squadron was already preparing for the final assault. Aiden's eyes swept over them, taking in the faces of his soldiers, young, terrified, but with the fire of determination burning in their eyes. They had come so far. They had endured the worst. Yet, as they prepared to board their ships, the grim reality of their mission began to set in. "Remember, we're not just attacking a weapon," Aiden said, gathering the team for a quick briefing. "We're attacking their heart. If we succeed, we take out the weapon that could wipe out all of humanity. But make no mistake, we're going to lose more before this is over." His words hung in the air, thick with the promise of sacrifice. No one flinched, no one spoke. The silence that followed was a shared understanding of what they were about to face. The launch bay doors slid open, and the pilots boarded their craft, strapping in with practiced efficiency. As Aiden climbed into his own fighter, he cast one last look at his crew. Ferris's death, the losses of the past, none of it had been in vain. Not yet. He couldn't let them die for nothing. "Let's finish this," Aiden said under his breath. And with that, the ships launched, cutting through the sky as they prepared for the final battle. The battle outside was chaos. Aiden's fighter cut through the maelstrom of fire and debris, his heart pounding in rhythm with the thundering pulse of the engines. His squadron was scattered, weaving through the ever-expanding battlefield as alien ships rose like dark phantoms from the shadows. Each blast sent ripples of violent shockwaves through space, threatening to tear apart anything in its path. "This is Captain Wells," he barked into the comms, his voice cutting through the static. "We push through, no matter the cost. Stay tight, stay focused." The team responded with grim determination, their voices coming through the comms, steady but filled with the knowledge of the fight they were in. "Acknowledged, Captain," Lieutenant Rivera's voice replied, strained but resolute. "We'll hold the line." Hayden maneuvered his craft through a field of incoming drones, his hand steady as he activated the plasma cannons, reducing the alien ships to fragments with every pulse. But the alien mothership remained untouched, hovering with a terrifying presence in the center of the battlefield. Its sheer size and firepower were a testament to the invaders' mastery over technology. Aiden's breath caught in his throat as he saw it. The glowing core of the mothership, an energy field that radiated a dark, unnatural aura. That was where the weapon was housed. The catastrophic device that could wipe out Earth's cities in an instant. It was their target, and it was heavily protected. "We're not going to make it through that shield." Vasquez's voice crackled through his earpiece. "Captain, we need a diversion, or we're all dead." Aiden's fighter jerked violently as an enemy plasma blast clipped the wing, sending sparks flying. His ship veered dangerously, but he regained control just in time. Through the crackling static, Aiden's mind raced. He had no choice now. He had to buy time for his team. They couldn't afford to fail. "Rivera, take the flank," Aiden ordered, his voice low but firm. "The rest of you, stay with me. We're going straight for the core." He could feel the resistance in the air, the invisible barrier of the mothership's energy field blocking their path. Aiden's fingers hovered over the controls, preparing to unleash everything they had. The firepower of Earth's most advanced weapons was nothing compared to what they were up against. But they had one advantage: their tenacity, their willingness to sacrifice everything for victory. "On my mark," Aiden said, his voice calm even as the chaos swirled around him. "We take the shield down, then we hit them with everything we've got. Don't hold back." The countdown began in his mind. 10 seconds. 9. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the lives of everyone depending on him. He stole a quick glance at the faces of the soldiers in his squadron, their expressions determined but tense. This was no longer about tactics. It was about the raw will to survive. "Mark," Aiden shouted, slamming his finger onto the trigger. The sky erupted in a flash of light as the full force of their weapons smashed into the shields surrounding the mothership. The shockwave rippled through the space, throwing Aiden's fighter off course once again. For a brief moment, everything went quiet. Then the shield cracked, the energy field flaring violently before dissipating into the void. Aiden's fighter shot forward with explosive speed, and the others followed in close formation. They had created the opening they needed, but now they had to make it count. The mothership's core loomed before them, pulsating with power. Aiden's hands gripped the controls as he guided his fighter into position. He could see it now. This was it, the heart of the enemy's weapon. Every move, every second, mattered. "We've got one shot," Aiden muttered to himself, knowing there was no turning back. As he lined up his shot, he could feel the weight of all the lives they were about to change, whether for victory or defeat. "On 3, he ordered, eyes locked on the target. 1, 2, 3. The sky exploded with fire as every fighter in his squadron unleashed their payloads, sending a barrage of missiles, plasma, and laser fire into the heart of the alien mothership. The explosion was deafening, a blinding wave of heat and energy that rippled through space. Aiden's fighter was thrown violently off course, the force of the blast sending shockwaves that rattled the entire ship. His hands fought to maintain control as alarms screamed in his earpiece. For a brief moment, he couldn't see anything but the sheer brilliance of the detonation. The vacuum of space swallowed the sound of their weapons, leaving nothing but the silent aftermath. "Captain," Rivera's voice pierced through the chaos. "The core, it's still intact. The shield is down, but we haven't hit the heart yet." Aiden's pulse quickened. The plan had been simple: hit the core, destroy the weapon, and take the mothership with it. But the force of their strike had only temporarily destabilized the energy flow. The mothership's core glowed brighter, pulsating ominously as if defying their efforts. "We're running out of time," Aiden muttered to himself. He looked around the battlefield, seeing the destruction, the wreckage of his squadron's earlier assault. Most of his fighters were still in formation, but some had already fallen in the chaos. Far too many had been lost already. "Damn it," he whispered, forcing his fighter back into line. "We're not giving up." His fighter shuddered under another enemy barrage, and he pulled hard on the controls, skimming the edge of the alien ship as his craft danced between blasts. The mothership's weapons systems recharged, and new waves of drones launched from its belly like a swarm of hornets, swarming toward him. "Aiden, get out of there." Vasquez's voice rang through his comms. "It's too dangerous. We need to fall back and regroup." He could hear the fear in her voice, but he wasn't backing down. Not now. The heart of the ship was exposed, and with it, their final chance to end this war. "Negative," Aiden shot back, his voice fierce. "If we don't finish this now, there's no tomorrow." With a steady hand, Aiden spun his fighter around, engaging the secondary weapon systems. A series of laser-guided missiles locked onto the glowing core, and with one decisive flick of his fingers, they launched. The missiles streaked across the vast distance, crossing the void at impossible speeds, slamming into the center of the mothership's core. The impact caused a cascading ripple of energy, a series of bursts like fireworks gone awry. The hull of the mothership shuddered, groaning as cracks formed along its outer layers. "We're not done yet," Aiden shouted, pushing his fighter into overdrive. "Everyone, fire at will, full assault." A synchronized barrage of missiles, plasma blasts, and concentrated firepower erupted from the remaining fighters in his squadron. The barrage struck the weakened core, causing a violent explosion within the mothership. This time, the force wasn't contained. The heart of the alien weapon erupted like a dying star, and the blast wave shot outward, sending ripples of destruction through the entire fleet. Aiden's heart raced as he felt the power of the blast surge toward him. His controls spasmed, and the screen in front of him flickered. The shockwave reached him with brutal force, shaking his ship to its core. His teeth ground together as he fought to keep the fighter intact, barely avoiding the shrapnel and debris that now littered the battlefield. "We did it." Rivera's voice came over the comms, her tone a mix of relief and disbelief. "The core's gone. The weapon, it's destroyed." Aiden's breath came in short gasps, but his eyes never left the mothership's shattered remains. The massive vessel began to break apart in slow motion, chunks of its outer hull peeling away like skin from a scorched animal. It was falling, no dying. But just as he thought the battle was finally over, the ship groaned, its massive frame splitting as a final, desperate countermeasure activated. They'd got a secondary weapon, massive energy pulse. "Get out of the blast zone. Now." Vasque screamed, her voice filled with alarm. The warning came too late. The pulse fired, a concentrated beam of energy so intense that it carved through space like a blade, cutting through anything in its path. Aiden's fighter was caught in its wake. Time slowed. His world went silent as the pulse neared, and in that moment, every decision, every sacrifice, every loss flashed before his eyes. The weight of it all settled into his chest like an iron anchor. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was for humanity's future, for every life that had ever been touched by the war. The world seemed to slow, the overwhelming pulse of energy rushing toward him with devastating inevitability. Aiden's fighter spun helplessly in the void, helpless against the destructive power that surged from the alien mothership's dying core. His hands moved instinctively, slamming the controls as if he could will his craft to escape the incoming obliteration. But nothing worked. A blinding light filled his vision as the pulse hit. The shockwave tore through his ship's hull, sending it spiraling. The scream of rending metal echoed in his ears, but the sound was drowned out by the roar of the energy storm consuming everything in its path. The control panel flickered and died, the lights inside his cockpit dimming as power drained from the ship. His body was pressed back into the seat, the pressure unbearable as his vision began to narrow. Then, silence. For a moment, there was no sound, no motion. Aiden's mind struggled to process what had just happened. Had he been hit? Was this the end? He couldn't feel his limbs, couldn't sense anything but the strange stillness that had overtaken him. But then, a familiar voice cut through the fog of his consciousness. "Captain. Captain Wells, are you there?" It was Rivera. "Rivera, I'm alive," Aiden managed to rasp, his voice hoarse and weak. His hands fumbled for the comm switch, the darkness in his cockpit fading as his vision returned. "We lost comms for a moment there," Rivera said, her voice tight with urgency. "Are you?" "I'm here," Aiden interrupted, his voice growing stronger. He blinked, wiping the sweat from his brow. "What happened?" "Everything's gone to hell," she replied, a pained edge to her tone. "The mothership, it's gone, but it didn't go down cleanly. The explosion set off a chain reaction. The debris field is massive. We're lucky to be alive." Aiden's hands gripped the controls once more. He glanced out of his shattered cockpit window, and the sight before him was nothing short of catastrophic. The remnants of the mothership floated lifelessly, large chunks of its once imposing frame drifting in space, the core still glowing faintly in the distance. But that wasn't the worst of it. Around him, the debris field stretched for miles, fragments of wreckage from both the alien ships and his own squadron scattered in all directions. Several of his fighters were completely destroyed, their once pristine forms now nothing more than twisted metal and smoldering wrecks. Others drifted motionless, no longer functional. "Is anyone else alive?" Aiden asked, his heart heavy. "We've got survivors, but not many. I've got 2 fighters on my screen, Captain. They're badly damaged. The rest," Rivera paused, her voice breaking for a moment. "The rest are lost." Aiden's stomach clenched. The weight of their losses hit him harder than any blow from the enemy. His squadron had given everything. They had charged into the heart of the storm with everything they had, and now only a handful remained. "Keep it together," Aiden said, his voice low but steady. "We're not done yet. We have to make sure this victory counts." "But what now?" Rivera asked, her voice strained. "The mothership is destroyed, but the enemy—" "I know," Aiden replied grimly. "But we've won the first battle, and we've bought Earth some time. We can't let their sacrifice be in vain." The thought of Ferris, of all the fallen soldiers, weighed heavily on his mind. He remembered their faces, their resolve. They had died for something bigger than themselves. He couldn't allow that to be forgotten. "We'll make sure they know what happened here," Aiden said firmly, his resolve crystallizing once more. "Send a distress signal. Let the fleets know the battle's won, but it's not over. Not yet." As Rivera relayed the orders, Aiden steered his battered fighter into position, preparing to rendezvous with the surviving squadron. His ship groaned as it came back to life, the warning lights flashing on the screen as the damaged systems came back online. He could feel the fatigue settling over him, but he didn't allow himself the luxury of rest. The real fight was just beginning. The damage was extensive, but humanity had proven something that day. The aliens had underestimated them, believing their advanced technology made them invincible. But Aiden Wells and his squadron had defied the odds, striking at the heart of the enemy's power. And now, they had to finish what they started. The comms were alive with static as Aiden guided his battered fighter through the wreckage. His mind was sharp, but the weight of the losses bore heavily on his shoulders. His squadron had been decimated, and the remaining ships were in bad shape, limping through the battlefield. Yet, amidst the destruction, there was a glimmer of hope. Humanity had struck a crippling blow to the alien invaders. "Captain, we're nearly out of power," Rivera's voice crackled through the comms. "I've got maybe an hour left before my systems shut down. We need a safe place to regroup." Aiden's eyes scanned the remains of the alien mothership, now a fractured monument to the fierce battle that had raged. Their victory was hollow without a solid plan for what came next. "Stay with me, Rivera. We can't afford to rest just yet," Aiden replied, his tone steady, though his muscles ached with exhaustion. "We need to find the rest of the fleet. We can't let them regroup and retaliate. Earth is counting on us." The silence between them was palpable, the gravity of their situation sinking in. They had won a battle, yes, but the war was far from over. The alien forces were scattered across the galaxy, their fleets still vast and incomprehensibly powerful. This victory had earned them a brief respite, but it was only the beginning of a much larger conflict. Aiden knew that the enemy would not be content with just one defeat. They would regroup, rebuild, and come back stronger. They had to ensure Earth's defense was ready for the onslaught that was sure to follow. "We've got incoming," Rivera warned, breaking Aiden from his thoughts. "Small fleet. Looks like reinforcements." Aiden's breath caught in his chest. It was too soon. They had barely enough strength to carry on, and yet the enemy had already begun to respond. "Pull back to formation," Aiden commanded, rallying the remaining fighters. "Everyone, full power to weapons. We fight, or we die. There's no middle ground." His hands tightened on the controls as his fighter surged forward. Ahead, the dark silhouettes of the alien reinforcements emerged from the void, their ships cutting through space like predators closing in on wounded prey. The odds were stacked against them, but there was no other choice. "Captain," Vasquez's voice rang out, her fighter appearing on Aiden's radar. "We've got you covered. Let's make sure this isn't our last stand." Aiden's pulse surged as he glanced at his tactical display. Rivera and Vasquez were in position, flanking him on either side. They had made it this far, survived the worst of the battle. Now it was time to fight with everything they had left. "Ready, Captain," Rivera responded, the sharpness in her voice a beacon of resolve. The enemy ships loomed closer, their weapons charging. Aiden could feel the weight of their firepower, but he didn't falter. He gripped the controls with renewed determination, focusing on the upcoming fight. There was no room for hesitation. Not anymore. "On my mark," he said, his voice calm, despite the growing tension. "We take them down in one strike. No hesitation. Move fast. Hit hard." Aiden's fighter accelerated, closing the distance with deadly precision. The enemy ships were bristling with weapons, but their hulls were still reeling from the aftermath of the mothership's destruction. They weren't prepared for a full-on assault from the remnants of humanity's might. "Mark," Aiden shouted, unleashing a torrent of plasma fire. The sky erupted in a dazzling display of light as the battle began anew. Plasma bolts and missiles filled the space between them, their paths crossing in flashes of brilliant destruction. Aiden's heart raced as he maneuvered through the chaos, narrowly avoiding enemy blasts while delivering lethal counterattacks. Each shot that hit its mark felt like a victory, but there was no time to savor it. They had to end this fight. Now. "Keep pushing," Aiden commanded. "Don't let up." The alien ships retaliated, their weapons cutting through the darkness like scythes, but Aiden's squadron held firm. Rivera and Vasquez darted through the swarm of enemy ships with deadly efficiency, taking down one after another. Aiden's fighter danced between explosions, dodging incoming fire as he launched his final barrage at the heart of the enemy formation. One by one, the alien ships began to fall. The sheer tenacity of humanity's fighters, their determination to protect their home, became a wall the enemy couldn't breach. The remaining forces were scattered, broken, and unable to keep up with the relentless push. Finally, the last of the enemy ships disintegrated into the void, leaving only the silence of space in its wake. Aiden allowed himself a brief moment to breathe, his heart pounding in his chest. The battlefield was a graveyard of fallen ships, human and alien alike. His squadron had survived, but at a great cost. "Captain, we did it," Rivera's voice came through, tinged with exhaustion. "We've won." Aiden's grip tightened on the controls. The victory was hard-earned, but it didn't feel like enough. He had done what was necessary, but the war wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The silence that followed the destruction of the enemy fleet was deafening. Aiden's breath came in shallow bursts, the weight of the battle finally settling into his bones. The victorious hum of his ship's damaged systems was the only sound left in the void. He allowed himself a moment to reflect, knowing it might be one of the last times he would feel any peace before the next storm came. "We've done it, Aiden," Rivera said, her voice hoarse but filled with a sense of reluctant triumph. "We've taken down their reinforcements. The field is clear." Aiden let the words sink in, but a sense of unease gnawed at him. They had won, yes, but the cost had been unimaginable. His squadron, once a proud force of elite fighters, was now a fraction of its original strength. The alien forces had been temporarily routed, but he knew this wasn't the end. The battle for humanity's survival was far from over. "What now?" Vasquez's voice was quiet, though her resolve hadn't wavered. "We can't keep doing this forever." "We rest," Aiden replied, though his voice was weary. "We regroup. We send word to Earth. The victory's ours, but the war is still out there. We need to prepare. They won't stop." The thought of Earth, of his home, of everything he had fought for, burned in his mind. The alien forces had underestimated humanity, believing them to be fragile and weak. But Aiden had shown them otherwise. He had shown them that humanity's strength wasn't in their technology, nor in their sheer numbers. It was in their unwavering will to survive, to fight for the ones they loved, and to protect their future. "Aiden," Rivera's voice faltered for a moment. "We've lost so many. The cost, it's so high." Aiden's grip on the controls tightened, his knuckles white. He had seen the faces of the fallen. He had heard their final words in his mind. Their sacrifices would not be in vain. They had given their lives so others could live, and he would honor that. He would ensure their names would be remembered. "We honor them by living," he said quietly, his voice heavy with the weight of command. "By fighting on. We've won today, but tomorrow we prepare for the next fight." There was a brief pause before Rivera spoke again. "What about Earth? What are we going to tell them? What happens when they find out the cost of this victory?" Aiden's gaze drifted toward the fractured wreckage of the alien ships, the remnants of their invaders now scattered in space like debris from a lost dream. They had fallen, but the war was far from over. The truth of what had happened here would have to be faced eventually, but Aiden knew one thing: humanity would survive. "We tell them the truth," he said firmly. "The cost was high, but the stakes have never been higher. We've survived. We've taken the fight to them, and we're not stopping until it's over." Ahead, Earth's distant moon flickered on the horizon, a small beacon of hope in the dark expanse of space. It seemed like a lifetime ago that he had looked upon it as a symbol of peace, the cradle of humanity's legacy. Now it was the foundation for a new future, a future born from the ashes of the past. They had won a single battle, but it was a victory that would shape the fate of the entire galaxy. "We'll go back," Aiden said, his voice resolute, "and we'll make sure that humanity's story is one of survival, of defiance, of victory. We will rebuild, together." As his ship powered down toward the rendezvous point, Aiden allowed himself a final moment of reflection. The faces of his fallen comrades danced in his mind, and though they were gone, they were not forgotten. The war had taken so much, but it had also given humanity something more, a reason to stand together, to fight for the future. Aiden knew this would not be the last battle, but it would be the beginning of a new chapter for humanity, a chapter where they were no longer the underdogs, a chapter where humanity's hero, Aiden Wells, stood unwavering. And in the end, they would be the ones to write their destiny.